What happens when the quietest member of one of the most powerful families in modern history finally speaks? For years, Barron Trump remained a silent figure, avoiding the spotlight while his father and siblings commanded headlines. But now, at 18, he has broken his silence, and the reaction has been nothing short of explosive. His words have sparked intense speculation. Was this a moment of independence, or did he unknowingly step into a political storm? His father, Donald Trump, has remained unusually quiet on the matter, leaving the public to wonder if there's tension behind the scenes. With the media dissecting every angle and his family choosing silence, is Barron charting his own path? Or has he just made a move that could change everything? Let's dive into details. For years, Barron Trump has been a figure of quiet mystery. As the youngest son of one of the most talked-about families in modern political history, his life has been scrutinized, yet his voice has remained unheard. While his father, President Donald Trump, dominated headlines, and his older siblings actively engaged in business and politics, Barron chose a different path, one of silence. Now at 18, that silence has been broken, and the world is beginning to understand why. Unlike Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, who became public figures early in their lives, Barron seemed to have a deliberate distance from the Trump brand. His public appearances were rare, usually limited to formal events, where he was seen standing quietly beside his mother, Melania Trump. Even as he grew older and his family remained in the spotlight, he continued to stay away from media attention. For many, this was unusual. A child born into wealth and power would normally be expected to follow in the footsteps of his family, yet Barron remained a quiet observer. His childhood was unique, marked by both privilege and an unusual level of privacy for someone in his position. When his father won the presidency in 2016, Barron became the first boy to live in the White House since John F. Kennedy Jr. Yet despite the media frenzy surrounding the Trump administration, he was kept away from the public eye. Melania Trump, known for her protective nature, made it clear that she wanted her son to have as normal a life as possible. Unlike his older siblings, Barron did not become involved in his father's political activities. He was rarely seen at campaign events, and when he was, he maintained a neutral presence, never speaking or interacting with the media. His mother's influence played a significant role in shaping his early years. Melania ensured that Barron had a structured upbringing, away from the chaos that often followed the Trump family. She chose to keep him out of public school, instead enrolling him in prestigious private institutions. Even during his time in the White House, he was notably absent from many public functions, appearing only when necessary. Unlike his siblings, who embraced their father's political career, Barron's interests appeared to be elsewhere. But now, the circumstances have changed. On March 20th, 2024, Barron Trump turned 18, marking his transition into adulthood. With that, the protective barriers around him began to fall. As an adult, he now has the legal freedom to make his own decisions, and his voice, once hidden behind his mother's careful shielding, can no longer be ignored. His coming of age raised several questions. Would he follow in the footsteps of his family and step into the public arena? Would he carve out his own identity, separate from the legacy of his father? Or would he choose to remain in the background, just as he had for most of his life? These speculations had surrounded him for years. And now, the world is getting its first real glimpse into who Barron Trump truly is. When Barron finally spoke, his words were not what anyone expected. His statement, though brief, was enough to cause a stir. Media outlets immediately picked up on it, dissecting every word, analyzing its implications, and speculating on what it meant for the future. Social media exploded with reactions, some praising him for finally stepping forward, others questioning his intent. But the biggest shock was not just what he said, but the weight his words carried. The Trump name has always been associated with strong, bold voices. His father built an empire on commanding attention, never shying away from controversy. His siblings followed suit, actively engaging in politics and business. But Barron? His silence had always made him the exception. That silence, however, is no more. His statement, though not explicitly political, was perceived by many as an indication of where he stands on certain issues. Some viewed it as a sign of independence, a moment where Barron finally took control of his own narrative. Others saw it as a potential crack in the Trump family's carefully maintained public image. The reactions varied, but one thing was clear. Barron was no longer just the quiet observer in the background. He had entered the conversation, and there was no turning back. The timing of his statement only fueled further speculation. With his father once again at the center of political discussions, Barron's words carried implications beyond just personal expression. Was this a carefully calculated move? A genuine moment of self-expression? Or was it something else entirely? Adding to the intrigue was the silence from the rest of the Trump family. Normally, when a major event unfolds within their circle, there is an immediate response. Donald Trump is known for addressing controversies head-on, often using social media to make his stance clear. Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric have always been vocal in defending their family's name. But in this case, there was nothing. No statements, no tweets, no official responses, just an eerie silence. This lack of reaction only added to the mystery. Was the family taken by surprise? Were they choosing to ignore it, hoping it would fade from the headlines? Or was there an internal conversation happening behind closed doors, one the public was not yet privy to? Regardless of the motivations behind Barron's words, the impact was immediate. In a single moment, he transformed from the quiet son of a former president into a central figure in a new and unexpected discussion. His actions had altered the way people viewed him. No longer was he just the youngest Trump, he was now a voice to be reckoned with. As the world waits for further clarity, one question remains. What comes next for Barron Trump? His statement has opened the door to speculation, but will he continue to speak out? Or was this a one-time event, an unplanned moment that spiraled into something far bigger than he anticipated? The weight of his last name will always be there, and now, so will the scrutiny. Every move he makes will be analyzed, every word he speaks will be examined. The question is, does Barron Trump have more to say, or has this moment defined his place in the public eye forever? Barron Trump's words had barely settled before speculation ran wild. For years, he had been a silent presence in a family known for making headlines. But now, his decision to speak out was fueling more questions than answers. His father's legacy loomed large over him, making his sudden statement a topic of intense scrutiny. The media dissected every possible angle. Political analysts debated the implications, and the public was left wondering, was this just a personal remark, or did it signal something much bigger? With the Trump family being deeply entrenched in political and business affairs, any statement from one of its members carried weight. But Barron had never been involved in any of it. Unlike his siblings, who spent years as active participants in their father's enterprises and campaigns, Barron had always been an observer. That was why his words, even if brief, took many by surprise. Did he intend to align himself with the Trump brand, or was this the beginning of a different path? More importantly, how would his family respond to his sudden entry into the public conversation? Donald Trump, a man who has built his public persona on directness and control over his image, has remained silent. In most cases, he is quick to defend, correct, or amplify the words of his family members, particularly when they are caught in the middle of controversy. But this time, there was nothing. His absence of a response led to speculation. Was he deliberately ignoring the matter, or was there internal tension within the family? The Trump brand had always been tightly managed, and Barron's unexpected public presence could disrupt that balance. Meanwhile, the media frenzy surrounding Barron's statement continued to grow. His words had sparked discussions across news platforms and social media, turning him into a central figure in conversations he had previously been absent from. For years, he had been considered a private individual, someone who did not engage with the public spotlight. But now, by his own doing or not, he was at the center of attention. And as public interest surged, one question became clear: what happens next? His transition into adulthood came at a time when the political climate in the United States was more divided than ever. The Trump name carried significant weight in political discourse, and any public stance taken by a family member was bound to be analyzed. But Barron's situation was unique. He had spent his formative years away from the political arena, growing up under the protective eye of his mother rather than in the corporate or political world that shaped his siblings. That distinction made his statement all the more significant. Some viewed his decision to speak as an assertion of independence, a sign that he was stepping away from the expectations placed upon him. Others speculated that it was a carefully orchestrated move, a possible attempt to gauge public perception before making a larger decision about his future. Either way, the response was undeniable. His voice had power, and people were paying attention. His mother's influence had always been seen as a key factor in keeping him distanced from public scrutiny. Melania Trump had made it clear throughout Donald Trump's presidency that she wanted Barron to have a childhood untouched by politics. Even as he grew older, she maintained that stance, rarely allowing him to be pulled into the political sphere. But now, with him reaching adulthood, that control was slipping. Barron was legally free to make his own choices, and his first step into the public sphere had already begun changing the narrative around him. His father's political ambitions further complicated the situation. With Donald Trump still a dominant figure in American politics, every move made by his family was under intense observation. The idea of Barron entering the public conversation, whether in direct support of his father or not, had broad implications. If he continued to speak out, it could add a new dynamic to the Trump legacy. If he retreated back into silence, it would leave lingering questions about whether this was a one-time event or the start of something bigger. Regardless of the intent behind his words, the way they were received mattered. In today's digital age, where social media dictates much of public perception, even a brief statement can have lasting consequences. The discussions about Barron's role in the Trump family had shifted dramatically, with more people speculating about what role, if any, he would play in shaping the family's future. This moment was different from anything he had experienced before. As a child, he had been largely shielded from controversy. His appearances had been controlled, his image carefully maintained. But now that has changed. His words had opened a door that could not easily be closed. Whether intentional or not, he had entered the public narrative in a way that had lasting effects. And with no clear response from the Trump family, speculation continued to grow. There was also the question of what impact this would have on his personal life. For years, Barron had lived with a level of privacy that was unusual for someone in his position. He attended private schools, lived in secure residences, and had a level of separation from the world that most public figures did not. But as the attention surrounding him intensified, maintaining that privacy would become more difficult. Would he embrace the spotlight, or would he attempt to distance himself from it once more? Observers began to draw comparisons between Barron and other children of political figures. Some pointed out the similarities to past presidential children who had attempted to stay private but were inevitably pulled into the political narrative. Others questioned whether Barron, like his older siblings, would eventually take on a more active role in public affairs. There was no clear answer, but one thing was certain: his decision to speak had changed the way people perceived him. As the days passed, without further clarification from Barron or his family, the speculation only increased. Some political analysts argued that this could be a moment that reshaped the Trump family's image. Others believed it was simply a young man stepping into adulthood and making a statement that had been blown out of proportion. But in the world of politics and media, perception often becomes reality. And in Barron's case, reality was quickly shifting. Whether he intended it or not, his words carried weight. He was no longer just the youngest son of a former president. He was now someone whose opinions, actions, and decisions would be watched closely. The question was no longer about what he had said, but rather about what he would do next. The attention surrounding Barron Trump's statement had only intensified. In the past, he had been a quiet figure, rarely seen, never heard. Now his words had placed him in the center of public discussion, and there was no escaping it. The media continued to analyze every angle, while political analysts debated what this could mean for the Trump family's future. The silence from his father and siblings remained, only fueling the mystery further. Was this a calculated decision to avoid drawing more attention, or was there tension behind the scenes? The Trump family had always been known for its strong, outspoken presence. Donald Trump had built an empire on his ability to dominate headlines, and his children had followed suit. Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric had all embraced their roles in both the business and political spheres, speaking on behalf of their father, defending the Trump name, and actively shaping their public personas. Barron, however, had always been the exception. Now, for the first time, he was stepping into a position where his voice mattered. and the world was paying attention. The timing of his statement only added to the speculation. With his father once again at the forefront of political discussions, any action by a member of the Trump family was bound to be interpreted as having a deeper meaning. Political strategists were quick to ask whether Barron was being positioned for a future role or if his words had disrupted the carefully managed image of the family. If it was the latter, the lack of response from Donald Trump suggested that he was taking a cautious approach, waiting to see how the situation developed before making a move. Social media was filled with theories about what this could mean. Some viewed it as a sign of independence, arguing that Barron was finally stepping out of his father's shadow. Others speculated that it was a mistake, a moment that had gotten out of hand, leading to unintended consequences. There were those who believed that his words were a reflection of internal disagreements within the Trump family, while others dismissed the controversy entirely, claiming that too much was being read into the situation. Regardless of the interpretation, the reality was clear. Barron was now a public figure in a way he had never been before. His every move would now be scrutinized, his words dissected, and his future decisions watched closely. Whether he wanted it or not, his transition into adulthood had come with a level of public interest that few could avoid. His family's response, or lack thereof, continued to be a focal point. Historically, Donald Trump had been quick to defend his children, addressing controversies head-on and making sure the public understood the family's stance. The absence of any statement regarding Barron's words was unusual. It led many to believe that there were discussions happening privately, with the family trying to determine the best course of action. If Barron had spoken without coordination with his father's team, it could be seen as a breach in the carefully controlled messaging that had defined the Trump family's public image for years. There was also the possibility that this moment was being used strategically. The Trump family had always been aware of how to manage media attention, and it was not uncommon for moments of controversy to be leveraged for political or business advantages. Some analysts argued that the silence from Donald Trump was a deliberate move, allowing the public to speculate before eventually addressing the situation in a way that benefited the family's overall strategy. If that was the case, the way Barron's next moves were handled would reveal the true nature of the situation. Despite the growing speculation, Barron himself had remained silent since his initial statement. There were no follow-up remarks, no clarification, no attempt to steer the conversation. This only added to the intrigue, as it was unclear whether he had spoken intentionally or if he was now attempting to distance himself from the reaction that followed. If he remained quiet, the debate would eventually shift to whether this was a momentary controversy or the beginning of a more public role. The dynamic between Barron and his siblings was also an area of interest. While the older Trump children had been vocal figures for years, their relationship with their youngest brother had always been more private. Unlike Ivanka, who was frequently seen in public with her father, Barron's interactions with Donald Trump had been far less visible. Some questioned whether this reflected a deliberate choice, suggesting that Barron had never been fully integrated into the family's political strategy. If true, his sudden emergence into public discourse could indicate a shift in how he viewed his role within the family. There was also the matter of public perception. For years, Barron had been largely exempt from the intense scrutiny that followed his father and siblings. While his family had been subjects of controversy, he had remained out of the discussion. Now that he had entered the public space, opinions on him were being formed in real time. Supporters of Donald Trump were divided. Some saw Barron's words as a continuation of the family's influence, while others questioned whether he was diverging from the established path. On the other side, critics of the Trump family speculated about whether Barron would follow in the footsteps of his father, or if he was attempting to carve out a different identity for himself. The potential implications of his words stretched beyond just the immediate reaction. If Barron continued to make public statements, it could set a precedent for his future. Would he remain an independent figure, separate from the political ambitions of his family? Or would he eventually be brought into the fold, aligning himself with the larger Trump narrative? These questions had no clear answers, but they highlighted just how much had changed for him in a very short period of time. His next steps would be crucial. If he chose to remain silent, it could indicate that this was an unplanned moment, something he did not intend to escalate. If he spoke again, it would solidify his position as someone whose voice carried influence. In either case, the attention surrounding him would not fade anytime soon. His words had created a moment that was impossible to ignore, and the way he handled it would shape how he was perceived moving forward. As the speculation continued, one thing became evident. Barron Trump was no longer just a background figure in his family's story. Whether by choice or circumstance, he had become part of the conversation in a way he never had before. And with that, the world was watching to see what he would do next. The speculation surrounding Barron Trump showed no signs of slowing down. As the days passed and the silence from his family continued, the mystery only deepened. His statement had been brief, but its impact was undeniable. What had once been a quiet existence, largely protected from the political and media frenzy surrounding the Trump name, had now transformed into an ongoing conversation about his place within the family and the broader public sphere. For many, the most intriguing aspect of this situation was how Barron's actions deviated from the expected pattern. His older siblings had spent years solidifying their roles, actively participating in their father's business and political ventures. Barron had taken a different route, remaining unseen and unheard for most of his life. Now, with one statement, he had entered a space he had long avoided, raising the question, was this a mistake or was it intentional? As the debate continued, another question emerged. What role, if any, did his family play in all of this? The Trump family had always been highly strategic in their public interactions, carefully curating their messaging and maintaining a level of control over their brand. If Barron's statement had been planned or coordinated, why had there been no follow-up? If it had not been planned, why had no one in the family stepped forward to clarify the situation? The absence of any response was unusual, especially given Donald Trump's history of swiftly addressing public speculation. There was growing discussion about whether this moment signaled a shift in the Trump family's internal dynamics. While Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric had long been active supporters of their father, Barron's public stance had never been clear. If his words suggested a different viewpoint, it could create friction within the family. Some analysts pointed out that while the Trump brand had always presented itself as unified, internal divisions were not unheard of. Over the years, there had been subtle but notable differences in how individual family members approached their roles, and Barron's emergence could further highlight these differences. The longer the silence stretched, the more theories emerged. One possibility was that the family had deliberately chosen to let the situation play out, rather than responding immediately. Given how frequently media narratives evolve, it was not uncommon for political figures to wait before addressing a controversy, allowing the public conversation to shift naturally. If that was the strategy, it suggested that Barron's statement had not been a planned move, but rather an unexpected development that the family was still assessing. Another theory was that the family itself was divided on how to handle the situation. While Donald Trump had always been quick to defend his children, this was the first time one of them had made a public move without clear alignment with the broader Trump messaging. If Barron's words had introduced uncertainty or disagreement within the family, it could explain the delay in response. The Trump name carried a specific set of expectations, and any deviation from that could require careful consideration before an official position was taken. Outside of the Trump family, opinions on Barron's words remained mixed. Among supporters of Donald Trump, reactions ranged from enthusiasm to skepticism. Some saw Barron's emergence as a positive sign, a moment where the youngest Trump was finally stepping into his own. Others were more hesitant, questioning whether this was a sign of independence or a misstep that could create unnecessary distractions. For those critical of the Trump family, Barron's statement was seen through a different lens, with some speculating that it could indicate a generational shift within the family, while others dismissed it as a temporary media moment that would soon be forgotten. Regardless of interpretation, the undeniable fact was that Barron's words had positioned him in a way he had never been before. He was no longer just the youngest Trump, the quiet son who stayed out of the spotlight. He had now been placed under the same level of scrutiny that had followed his father and siblings for years. And while his initial words had created the moment, his silence afterward had only fueled further curiosity. The challenge he now faced was how to navigate this new reality. If he remained silent, it could suggest that he had spoken impulsively, not anticipating the reaction his words would generate. On the other hand, if he continued to speak out, He would be making a deliberate decision to engage with the public in a way he never had before. Each choice carried consequences, and with the world watching, every move he made would be analyzed and interpreted. This attention also extended to his personal life. Barron had spent much of his childhood away from the public eye, attending private schools and maintaining a level of distance from the intense media focus that surrounded his family. Now that separation was disappearing. Every aspect of his life was being examined with new interest. His academic plans, his relationships, his social activities, all of these had now become topics of speculation. Whether he wanted it or not, he was no longer an unknown figure in the background. His situation was not without precedent. Many children of public figures had found themselves in similar positions, suddenly thrust into the public eye and forced to decide how to handle it. Some had embraced the attention, using it to carve out their own identities, while others had struggled with the weight of expectations placed upon them. The challenge for Barron was unique in that he had spent his entire life in a family that was constantly under scrutiny, yet he had managed to remain largely outside of it. Now, for the first time, he was fully within that spotlight, and how he handled it would determine whether this was a passing moment or the beginning of a long-term shift in his public presence. As the days passed, the initial shock of his words began to settle, but the questions remained. Would he continue to engage with the public, or would he allow the moment to fade away? Would his father or siblings eventually address the situation, or would they let it stand without response? And perhaps most importantly, did Barron himself realize the full weight of what he had set in motion? For now, the world waited. His statement had already changed the way people viewed him, and whether he liked it or not, he was now a subject of national and international conversation. Every move from this point forward would be watched, every word examined. And as the speculation continued, one thing became increasingly clear. Barron Trump's silence had once been his defining characteristic, but now, his words had ensured that silence would never be viewed the same way again. Barron Trump's silence once defined him, but now, his words have reshaped the way the world sees him. Whether intentional or not, his statement has sparked questions about his future, his family's response, and his place in the public eye. Will he embrace the attention, or will he retreat into the shadows once more? With speculation growing and the Trump legacy still unfolding, one thing is certain: whatever Barron does next, the world will be watching. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.